Hello. In this video, I'll be demonstrating some of the very basics of 3D rendering in general, as well as in Touch Designer more specifically. Right, so whenever you're doing 3D graphics in Touch Designer, you typically need to start with some sort of 3D object. Now, to get this, you can either import a model. I tend to import OBJ file type, or we can generate some geometry in Touch Designer, right? Which is a good place to start if you're just exploring. So to create some simple 3D geometry, I'm going to open the operator dialog, pressing tab, and now we're actually going to go to a new tab here, the SOPs. That stands for Surface Operators. So this is all to do with 3D geometry. In this case, I'm going to pick box, right, which is really a cube. If I place it here, you'll see it just looks like a square, but it is indeed a cube. If we make the viewer active by clicking on the little cross here, we can interact with the viewer, and you'll see you can rotate it around just by clicking and dragging, and if we roll the mouse wheel, we can zoom out and view it in 3D space. So yes, it is a cube. All right, so the next step, if you've been following my tutorials, by now you'll realize I love to put down the null. So yeah, the SOP category has its own version of a null, which is just sort of an endpoint, right, which we can put down in case we want to add anything in between. Now, if you look at the null, that it's back to its starting position. And that's because I didn't actually rotate the cube, right? It's just in the viewer I'm examining it from a different angle. But it's not actually changed in virtual space. It's still face on. Okay, good. So now the thing to understand about this cube right now is that in a sense it doesn't exist. We couldn't, let's say, put any images on it. We couldn't display it anywhere. We couldn't light it with a light or view it with a camera or anything like that. It's just an abstract mathematical set of points, edges, and faces. So the next step in the process is to convert it to a state where we can actually start texturing it and lighting it and viewing it, right, in a real virtual scene. So this is very specific, the way that we have to do this in Touch. I typically right-click on this output, and the component that we need is called geometry. So this is important that we do it that way, specifically, that you right-click and you choose it while creating this connection automatically. Because, for example, if I just put a geometry down, it's actually set up differently by default, and this can be a bit confusing. So to reiterate, in this step, you want to select the output of your geometry here. I know it's kind of confusing because this is geometry too, but of this null, let's say, and we're going to drop geometry node. This basically converts our abstract geometry into a surface that can actually be textured and lit, etc. Okay, good. So from here, any 3D scene typically needs a light and a camera at minimum. So luckily for us in Touch Designer, all of these components are available. We have a default light that we can place in the scene. And we also have a default camera component that we can place in the scene. Now, so far, still nothing is happening. What we need finally to tie all this together is a way to bring all of this out of the abstract 3D world and render it into a 2D image, right? So we're trying to bring this cube into the world of these texture operators, into the purple family. And the way we do that is we use a render texture operator. Okay, so it's used to render all 3D scenes in Touch Designer. So I'm going to place one of these down, and as soon as I do, you'll see that it has a default behavior where it tries to associate with, right, all existing geometry, lights, and cameras. And so if I zoom into this, this now is the representation of the geometry as a 2D image. And right from here, we can now treat it like any other image. Okay, excellent. Except that it still looks like a square. So why don't we rotate it a little bit just so that we can see that it is a cube? So there's a couple options for this. The geometry component here has transform options. So I can, let's say, go to rotate on the y-axis, and I'm going to rotate by tens and just turn it a little bit like that. Okay, I still can't see the top faces, so maybe we'll give it a bit of a tilt, maybe like that, and like that. Not sure. Okay, good enough for now. We can see that it's a cube. Okay, awesome. So now, let's send this out to a null. Just gonna send that to there. I will add a black background to it. There's a couple ways of doing this. Quick way to do it is just to add this RGB key. This just automatically does it. There's a couple other operators that just automatically fill the background, but this one's just a quick way. And I will activate the viewer here, the display, so we can see our geometry in the background. All right, awesome. Now, I mentioned that we have a light, and you can see that our render is referencing this light. And actually in the parameters, under lights, there's a star, and that simply means that all lights in the network are being used. In this case, there's only one. So if we go to the light, it too has some transform options. And for example, if I translate it upwards, that's downwards. Yeah, so you can see the virtual light in my scene is changing. And I could translate it sideways. And the other thing we could do is change the angle of the camera. So with the camera, it's often a good idea to choose an object which the camera is looking at so that it can orient itself in a way that makes sense. So in this case, this cube is my point of interest. And so in this look at parameter, I can drag the geometry, and now, right, that's what my camera is going to be looking at regardless of where I move it. So if I was to say move my camera upwards, whoops, yeah, you can see it's like tilting as if my camera's now going above the cube, and now I can go all the way to like a bird's eye view way above the cube. All right, so okay, we'll tilt it like that. In fact, I'm going to go back to these rotation settings, and I'm going to remove the rotation from the x-axis and the z-axis. Yeah, just so it's a little more neat. Okay, so now my camera's above the cube looking down. The light is, I think, slightly to the left and up in the air a bit. And there we go. So we have this boring gray cube. The next step might be to texture it. So that involves bringing a 2D image, again, from this purple texture family, and finding a way to wrap it around the 3D geometry. And we'll find that there are a lot of different ways to wrap a 2D image around a 3D surface. So let's try just some simple examples. I've actually got some stuff in the project here that we can mess with. So we'll start with this. It's kind of abstract. It's just a noise operator, just the default from Touch Designer. I'm animating the noise with my favorite expression ever. Abs time dot seconds, absolute time in seconds divided by 8. All right, so how do we take this and put it on the cube, right? Like, you can't do that. That won't work. As a general rule, you can never connect one color family to another one. Like, that won't connect, right? You have to connect them to each other. So in this case, we need to use an intermediary, which is from another family. So I'm going back into operator create, and I need a material. This is a special category just for applying textures to 3D surfaces. If you know anything about 3D graphics, you'll probably recognize some of these words. The most, I would say, important ones for us right now are Phong and maybe constant. Okay, so Phong can do like shading, texturing, lighting. Constant is just like one flat color. All right, and then otherwise PBR is not the beer. It's physically based rendering, which is a little more complex in terms of the reflections and all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna go ahead and pick Phong. Has a funny name because it's named after its inventor. Okay, so if now I drag the Phong onto the geometry, we get this little dialog here, and we want to apply it to the material, which will barely do anything, right? And that's because simply the Phong is also gray. But if we were, say, to go into the geometry and go into render tab, you'll see that the material now is the Phong. Okay, so good. Now before, I apply this noise, I think I'm going to do what I always do and add a null. Just in case we decide to change what this texture is. But I'm going to now apply the null to the Phong, or rather the noise texture. And as soon as I do this, now notice there's a lot of options, because with the Phong you can use an image to do all kinds of different things. The top one is really all we're going to look at today. So that is just what we call the color map. There we go. So now the noise has been wrapped around the 3D object. And this is looking a little bit dark. Maybe let's bring our light. What's that? Maybe I can just brighten my light. Okay. So that looks pretty cool. that kind of works simply because this texture is so abstract, right? Like, as a general rule, the more abstract and kind of regular your texture is, the more likely that it'll just sort of work when you wrap it around something. I'll give you another example. This is just something I've pulled out of Touch Designer. This is like a default type thing. You could find it in the tops. So it's Substance, which the Substance basically has a couple options and you can load stuff in, but it creates a texture and gives you some other types of outputs. So for example, this would be what's called the normal map. So this is like how light would hit this texture. And then a couple other ones. So it's all for like shading and texturing. But again, I'm just pulling what's called the color map out of it, the base color. So really, if I plug this in, now my cube should be sort of concrete looking. Yeah, and you can see there, I have a concrete cube now. And again, that looks not bad, right? Let's try one more. Let's say if I was to grab this Super Mario cube texture. So this now, if I bring this into the null, not great, right? That's not what we were expecting. And that's simply because Touch Designer doesn't know immediately what to do with this texture, how we want to wrap it around the cube. And this really gets into a whole other topic about like the ways that we can wrap textures around 3D surfaces. Gets into the topic of so-called UV mapping, which I'm not going to talk about today. So we will leave that alone. I'll show you one example. There is one tool that we can use to solve some simple texture situations, and I'm going to insert it here. It's actually called the texture operator. And so right away you can see that as soon as I drop this, Touch Designer applied a different, I guess, algorithm to how it is texturing this cube, right? Or it's using a different map. We can go to the texture type here and try some different ones. So that doesn't look good, right? But you know what? It actually is better than you think, because if I translate it, right, that's not terrible. The only thing is if we rotate it, you'll see, well, some of the faces are flipped the wrong way. So it's like almost correct. But again, Touch Designer, it doesn't really understand what we want to do with this, okay? And to explicitly put 2D images on a 3D object exactly the way you imagine, you need to go to sort of the next level of texturing. Okay, great. So those are the basics of how this stuff works. Just to show you here, let's say at the end where I've converted it back into a 2D image, I could now, combine this with anything. So if I go to my operators here and just going to create a simple background. So I'll take a ramp, create it circular, and flip these around because I want it to be bright in the middle. So go like that. I'll push the period bigger like that. And when we're combining images, you want the resolution to be the same. So I might just take a look here. This is 1280 by 720. So I'll just set in the common tab here 1280 by 720. And well, now we'll just use a composite. So right clicking on the wire, inserting. I'll pick a composite, plug in my ramp, and that's using a multiply operation right now. So it looks like just some extra glow. Instead, I'm going to use an over, and that looks, you know, not great. I'm just going to, you know, settle that down a bit. Maybe. Okay, good enough. The point being is that now it's just an image, and we can do, you know, whatever you would normally do to an image. Okay, good. Quick last thing. Let's say we don't like our box anymore. Let's plug this noise back in to here. And let's say we don't want a box, we want a ball. So I'm going to go back into my operator create, and in the surface operators, I'm going to look for a sphere. All right, it's going to generate a basic sphere. We will wire it into here, into texture. See what happens by default. It's a little bit big. I'll pull the radius down. Okay, and you can see that again, the texture, it's not exactly what I want. Maybe if I turn off the texture, that's closer, but you see there's still this seam running down it. And that's simply because if you imagined that you were wrapping an image around a ball, right, the two edges would have to connect, right? Or otherwise you'd see where the paper would wrap onto itself, right? It wouldn't connect. So generally speaking, when you're wrapping a sphere or something like it, you need to make sure that your texture loops. So a simple way that I might do that here is if I insert, there's a tile operator. There's an operator for everything if you haven't noticed. It's just the longer you use this program, the more you start to remember which ones exist and what they're for. So, okay, this that doesn't make sense. That just duplicated our image 4 times. That doesn't help. But if I go to the tile tab, I can flip all of the images. So now each one connects to the other. And again, you know, this ends up with a fairly abstract sort of tie-dye psychedelic look to it. But you can see on the ball itself now, there's no more seam because the image is now seamlessly looping. What there still is, though, is at the very top, you can sort of see there's like a pinch, right? It might be more obvious if I plug the concrete in. Yeah, if you see sort of how at the top the texture gets pinched into a point, which again is due to the nature of the sphere and the way the texture is being warped to wrap around it. So typically with textures that are meant to go on a sphere, like this planet Earth texture I have, it's been pre-warped to fit onto the sphere. So if I plug this in, right, there's maybe a tiny bit of distortion at the top, but generally speaking, if we, let's put in my favorite expression, abs time dot seconds times 40. Yeah, so you can see this, this texture worked pretty well, right? Just out of the box, as they say, because it is a spherical texture. Like it's been set up to go on a sphere. Okay, so I know this is all fairly new to some of you. I hope that this just sort of gives you a starting point when working with 3D graphics. I guess the final thing, I know I've already gone on long here, but I'll show you an example of a very complex model. So this bottle here. Now, why not? Well, let's just plug it into the planet Earth texture and see what the hell happens. Probably going to be a complete disaster. What did it do even? I don't think it liked that planet Earth texture at all. Let's try to plug in the noise texture. Yeah, so it's hard to even guess what's going to happen with a model this complex. The texture operator will help to apply it. So for example, if I go to texture type, the XYZ normalized is typically a good starting point. And so, with an abstract texture like this noise on a complex model, it's still passable. You could still get like a decent result like that. Or if we want to make our bottle made of rock for some reason, that's, you do see some evidence there of it wrapping around on itself. But anyways, this too much for one tutorial. Those are the basics of 3D rendering and texturing. So yeah, hopefully you found that somewhat interesting. That's all for now. Thanks. Bye.